What's up, everybody? Today is going to be another installment in the TrueNAS Fundamentals series. Today we're going to be covering the Apps tab of TrueNAS. And today I'm going to be looking at my test system. This is 10.99.0.191, which is the instance of TrueNAS I have running in my Proxmox cluster just for testing. I like to use this instance for demonstrations because I have a huge mix of different types of apps in here. And today I'm going to go over all the basics of using this tab. Let's start by talking about what this is and what this isn't. If you're new to TrueNAS, then you might not know that this is just basically Docker. I couldn't say that previous to certain versions. It used to be different things, but now this is just Docker. So in the shell, this is just a UI that they use to run Docker, and there's a couple different things and layers going on here. So you'll see here some of these have these weird symbols, some of these have actual icons, and some things you don't even see at all. So I'm going to show you the difference of what is being managed and what's not being managed by the Apps tab, because you might not see everything you have running, and you might see things running that you might not see in other places. So let's start by talking about what I can and can't do through this screen. TrueNAS has made the decision to only show apps that are launched either through the community store or through the launch through custom YAML or the custom apps on the screen. Now, the problem with that is I can launch something through the command line or through Dockge, which I'll talk about in a minute, that you won't see on the screen. And that's the challenge to see, with this tab. You might look at this and say, oh, I only have this many apps, and that's not true. There could be things running under the hood that you're not aware of. So just be aware that the TrueNAS Apps tab is only showing you some of the picture. So let's talk about what it is showing you and how to launch some apps like that. One of the first ways to launch apps is going to be the Discover Apps right here. I always want to make sure my catalog is refreshed just by clicking that button. And yep, there we go. It went from 222 to 223. So there's an app that was added here that maybe I wasn't aware of. I think it was probably Windmill because that's what's showing up right here. So let's just take a look at something like this. I'm just going to click this little thing right here. And this shows me what it is. It's an open source developer platform and workflow engine. It turns scripts into auto-generated UIs, APIs, cron jobs. That's pretty cool. On the right side here, we'll see what it does. It's basically 7% usage. It uses about 4 gigs of memory, and it'll show me what it runs as. So it's running stock as user group of 1,000, and there's also a part of here that runs as root. The reports worker runs as root. So this is a pretty complicated container, actually, just to use for a demonstration. So let's come back out here. Let's go to apps, and let's go to Discover Apps, and let's go to just a basic app that you guys probably use a lot, which is Jellyfin. So you'll see here it's listed as installed, and I can install a second instance if I want. But here we have some screenshots, and this is probably a lot more basic. So it's 18% usage. Oh, so this is just what's going on right now. I'm sorry. This is what's in my available resources, not what the actual app uses. So it runs this 568, which is what we're used to here on this channel. And if I install another instance, you'll see it'll open up this interface right here. This is very different than the regular Docker interface. This is all custom to TrueNAS, so you have to kind of get used to their system. It's unique. It's not used anywhere else. Here it'll show you the basic configurations, the user that it runs as if you want to change its permissions, ports, and networking. And this is what I want to kind of get to a little bit, especially digging in here. We have the opportunity now to do custom ports, and I'm going to show you an example of how to do that in a minute. But basically what this is going to do right now is a web UI and an HTTPS port. So there's 2 ports available for this container, and right now it's going to publish the port on host for external access. That's great. There's no port bind mode, and I can add a host IP later, and I'm going to show you guys that at a different time. Right now I just want to kind of go through this. The storage configuration here, this is your volume mounting if you're familiar with Docker. Right now it's going to auto create IX volumes. I don't ever recommend you use these, and the reason for that is if you use an IX volume and then TrueNAS chooses to change something, which I'm going to tell you happens almost every single release, there's a risk that you might have to rebuild your containers. You might have to do a lot of work to get your old volumes to your new volumes because not everything works and migrates cleanly. So what I recommend on this channel a lot is to use the host path configuration. Host path pretty much means that you're just going to define a data set in your datasets tab, and then you're going to point this app to that data set. So that's where it's going to store all of its information. Now, there might be more than one type of storage. Like, for example, here we have a config storage, and we have a cache storage, and we have a transcode storage. So we might have to create multiple data sets to store all this stuff, but that's what I recommend you do. That's going to be way safer than using IX volumes, because I just have had bad experiences with IX volumes with breaking changes. So I've already been burned once. I use host path now. You can do labels here if you have traffic or something like that going on, and they have, for some reason here, a resources configuration. By default, TrueNAS will give you 2 CPUs and 4 gigs of memory to use here. I don't like that. I think it's actually really interesting that they do that because they require these numbers, whereas in regular Docker or any other type of container, unless you define this section, you just get all your resources, which I kind of like. Anyway, 2 and 4 in this case is going to be fine for that container. Here you have the GPU configuration. For people that have NVIDIA graphics cards or other graphics cards that are recognized, you'll see the pass-through is available. And I'm going to show you now how to turn that on, because this is just the basic section for TrueNAS. So this is how you would launch it through their apps catalog. If you do have a GPU, you're going to want to come over here to configuration, and then you're going to want to go ahead and go to your settings, and you'll see a checkbox down here. See how it says check for Docker image updates? That's fine. You're going to see another checkbox that says enable like NVIDIA drivers, for example, if you have an NVIDIA card. You're going to want to check that box, then hit save, and that takes a second to kick in sometimes. If you check that box and immediately go to your apps and try and pass through a GPU, you might not find it at all. You might not even see the checkbox, and you say, hey, what's going on? I just checked the box. Most times you're going to have to restart your server after checking the box for NVIDIA drivers in order to get them to be recognized, or just wait like 10 minutes. It takes a long time. So that's the basics of launching through an app catalog. Now, I'm going to tell you the app catalog is really interesting, and I kind of like it for certain reasons. Like, for example, Jellyfin. I've set this up before, so I can come over here and go to Edit. And if I wanted to change something here, I can make some changes. So you see here, I've already put in my server URL. I've already changed the default port. And I already have host path here for my config storage. This is set up correctly the first time. I've mounted an external path here. So for example, if you are mounting your media folder in, because you have media existing on your hard drive already, we need to mount that from the host path, in my case, mount tank media, into the /media inside the container. So the bottom part here you'll see is the outside data set, what it's going to look like on your TrueNAS server, and the mount path is what it's going to look like inside your container. So that's kind of the layout here. You kind of get it takes some getting used to compared to Docker. And you can see here, I don't have any GPUs, otherwise there'd be another checkbox. But in the event that I get a GPU later, I could always come back and edit, and then the checkbox will appear and I can check it. So I can go and add and remove a GPU from this container or any container, because they can be shared across multiple containers after I add my GPU or after I have apps up and running. So I don't want you to wait to launch apps until your GPU is here or until it's running. You can launch the app now, then add the GPU later. Let's talk about another way to get some apps in here. That's the apps catalog. The other way here, if I click discover apps, is going to be through either a custom app or a install via YAML. When you click the custom app button, it's basically the same thing as a Docker Compose file, but they have the fields here that are just pretty much, they give you the option of putting all stuff in. I'll level with you, I don't know how to use this. I think this is not as clean as just doing a basic Docker Compose file. In my opinion, there's no reason to use this. It's kind of a holdover from previous versions of TrueNAS. It doesn't make as much sense to me as coming over here and just doing an install via YAML. This is really simple. I just give this a name, and then I post my YAML I just paste my YAML configuration here and hit save, and it deploys. And I'm going to show you one that I've done that for already. So let's come back out to my apps. You'll notice here some of these don't have icons, and those are the ones that I've deployed with the install via YAML. So let's look at something like, let's look at Arcanes. I was doing that the other day. So I'm going to come over here and edit this. And this is going to be the Docker Compose for Arcane. And it's just a simple copy and paste. Looks like every other Docker Compose on the wiki. Nothing fancy here. So this, in my opinion, is a great way to run basic volume mounts, basic ports, the restart policy, some environment variables, and a container name. It's pretty straightforward. That's really easy. The only thing I don't like right now is the fact that it doesn't show any kind of pretty icon. And of course, I'll be honest with you, I think this whole interface could use an overhaul compared to some of the other container managers out there. I think TrueNAS can definitely take some notes for a lot more information and a lot more useful functions on the screen. But that's just my opinion. But that's a really good way in terms of the apps tab and managing apps you can see on this tab and how we go about doing that. You'll notice here that I have quite a few updates available for some of these containers. Now, another thing I don't like about TrueNAS is it doesn't let you update stopped containers, where something like Watchtower, which I'm going to show you in a minute, does in fact update stopped containers. So if I come over here and I click update all, and here's the other problem too, I can't update a single container. If I, for example, click like image, for example, even though it's not running, even if it was running, there's no update button here. It's just not, it's not possible. I have to update all my containers at once. I don't like that. So if I click upgrade here, you're going to see basically a whole lot of failures like this, and it's going to say app upgrade, and it says in order to upgrade an app, it must not be in a stop state. So that's kind of useless. So I'm not really thrilled with that, but it's okay. That's just the basic screens here. If you have an app that you launch the app catalog, you'll get a cool web UI button. If you don't, you won't. So file browser, for example, there's no web UI button here. I actually have to know the IP and the port that's published for that to work. But everything else is going to have this really cool web UI button that it loads in here. And I can see some information here about what's going on. So that's a way to manage this through the TrueNAS Apps tab. One more thing I want to show here is talking about assigning IPs based on containers. So in something like Dockge, for example, which is already running, I can give this a custom IP if I wanted to do that. It doesn't really make sense for Dockge, but it makes sense for a lot of other things like, say, for example, Nginx Proxy Manager, which uses 80 and 443, which is the same ports that TrueNAS uses. Then you notice here I've already changed my default web UI ports for TrueNAS because before this, that wasn't available for me to launch something like Nginx Proxy Manager on its own IP. But I come down here to my network configuration, and I can add a host IP here. Right now it's binding to all the host IP addresses. So what I can do is come over to my networks tab, and in my bridge I can go ahead and I can add another address here, another alias. So in this case I want to do 10.99.0. In my case, like I think 221 is open. All right, and I can do that with 24, so I can save that like that, and I can test my changes and test, and I can save. And I can save. So now, for example, I'm now holding 1099.0.221 within this bridge network, and I can come back to my apps and go to Dockge, and I can edit this, for example. And now when I go to my network configuration, I can add a host IP that's different. You'll see now I have the 221 address. So now if I do that and I click save, Dockge is going to run on 1099.0.221, not 1099.0.191. Small caveat for people that are network buffs out there, you'll notice that because in my case, my network, my bridge is still, if I show you this bridge configuration, the bridge member is in ENS18. It means it's funneling everything out of ENS18 anyway, which means when this traffic goes outbound, it's still going to outbound to the same address. So this is not going to work if you're trying to do something like, hey, I want my outbound traffic to be on its own IP. That's not the way this works. This only works for internal IP, private IP for assignment. As soon as you start going out of the network, it's all going to funnel through the same exit. So this is not going to help you in that case. This just helps you in the event that you have some kind of port collision, like with 80 and 443 if you're running some kind of reverse proxy. So that's a really good, just quick way in order to change the IP address. Before this, there was a small bump. So if you've tried to do this before with something like Nginx Proxy Manager, then you go to start it and it says, hey, sorry, that port's in use. That bug has been fixed. So if you had that problem before, please try again. All right, so now let's talk about some other options. Now I've done other videos on all types of other Docker container managers, things like Dockge, Arcane, Portainer. All those still work here. So for example, I have Dockge running right now, so we can go ahead and click into the web UI. And you can see here I'm running all these containers. Now, the RStack, for example, I told you this stuff before. Let me start this really fast. These containers aren't running right now, but now that all these containers are started, when I come back out to TrueNAS and I click off and I click back onto my apps tab, like I said before, you're not going to see like 20 apps right now. Now there's a whole bunch of stuff running in the background. Look at all these apps that are running. Prowler, Radar, Sonar, General, all this stuff is running right now. But you don't see any of that in the apps tab, and that's just the way that TrueNAS works. This is itself a Docker container manager, and just like most Docker container managers, stacks and Docker containers created in other container managers aren't visible or editable through this interface. So that's kind of a challenge, and a lot of people, I'm hoping in the future this is going to continue to evolve and get better. This has definitely got a lot of room to improve, which is good because that means that there can be a lot of improvement. But if you want to use the Docker container manager like Dockge, which is what I use and I've done a ton of videos on, you can come in here and you can do the same thing you're used to doing, and I can stop my containers, I can launch new containers, I can create new compose stacks, all those things. So if that's kind of your jam, and I kind of think it is for me because I think it's a lot cleaner of an interface. We have my compose here, I have all my stacks, I see what's going on under the hood, I have logs all the way down here at the bottom. So yeah, to me, this is a much more complete interface, and I like it a lot more. So I'd rather use something like Dockge. And if you're going to do that, just be aware, you're not going to see things here. So there might be things going on under the hood. If you're curious about what's going on under the hood, you could always jump into your shell. For example, make sure you are root when you do this. And you're going to want to do a Docker PS. Docker PS will show you what's running right now. So because I stopped that container, you can see the only thing running on the system right now is in fact Dockge. And I can see that through the TrueNAS apps page, but if I had the app stack running, my RStack, you'd see a whole lot more containers here that are running. So let me just do a demonstration really fast to show you guys what it looks like when you've got a lot more stuff running. So let's start this right here. Let's come back out to my shell. I'm going to do the exact same thing. blow this up. I'm going to make sure that I am root. And I'm going to do the same docker ps. And look at all these containers now. Sonar, Prowler, Radar, yada, yada, yada. One of the things you'll notice about this is that the ones that are running on TrueNAS will always start with IX. So if you see anything that starts with IX in this case, that usually means that you're running a container out of the TrueNAS apps catalog. Everything else is named the container name that I gave it when I was in Dockge. So I can go ahead and stop this container now. And that's all stopped. And then we're going to run that same command again. And some of them are down, some of them are down. And things are still dropping right now. So you'll see here that that's clear. The only thing we have left now is Dockge, so everything is turned down. So yeah, that's just a really quick way to see what's going on in the background through your command line, which is the ultimate source of truth. One other thing I want to cover on the apps section is the way that the apps run. Now, a lot of people will say, and are confused with the fact that just because I have my data in a certain place, that's where the app is quote unquote running from. These are people that usually use a split amount of storage, like if you have SSDs or NVMe drives mixed with HDDs and you want to take advantage of the speed of your SSD or NVMe over your HDD. So in the event you have like a spinning Rust disk and you say, hey, I don't want my apps running from there, but I have a ton of data that I want running from there. How do I make this work? That is a pretty simple thing to do. For example, if I have two storage tanks here, and I don't in this case, I just have tank. But in mine, for example, let me jump over to my TrueNAS and I'll show you. This is my actual TrueNAS, and you'll see here in storage I have a bunch of pools. One pool is called apps, and this is an SSD. I have a backup disk, and I have a large 4x4 spinning Rust array. So the way this works here in terms of my apps, you'll see here, I don't have a ton of stuff running. Most of my stuff runs through Dockge, and I'm not even running Dockge through the catalog. I'm running Dockge through the command line. So you're not even seeing my Dockge here, but there's a lot of other containers running in the background. I'm talking something like 50 containers that you can't see through here the screen. So let's take my apps, for example. You'll see my data sets here. Most of my configs live on my pool here. This is all my configs files, and these are for all the apps that are running in the background that you can't see, and they're all running on my HDD pool. So that's where my configs are, and my stacks directory and stuff. Let me close this here. Here's my stacks directory, also running on my spinning Rust pool. So you might be thinking, man, that must go really slow. That's not the case, because my apps themselves are running on the apps pool. So the way that's set up when you come over here is you want to jump to your configuration, you want to hit choose pool, and you'll see here my pool is apps. When I choose the pool for apps, that's where the IX dataset is going to live. This right here, IX applications. This is where my apps are actually running out of, this pool right here. Now, that's important because I can have all my data on the big pool, which has got I have 10 terabytes basically of usable space on this pool. I've used about half of it so far. So I've got a ton of space here to store config files, stack files, all kinds of cool stuff. But the apps themselves don't run off the drive. The apps run off this data set, which is in the apps pool. The reason that I do that, and I do it specifically, is that in the event that TrueNAS does something that is a breaking change, like I said before, because that happens, if I have to recreate all of my apps, it's no big deal because all of these apps are pointed at stacks and config files that live on a separate host path. So that's totally safe. If I had to come in here and recreate this, I basically just can start up, in my case, Dockge, because that does most of my management, point it towards my stacks directory, or data set in this case, and then just hit start and launch all my containers. And they'll all launch like nothing happened, no matter what breaking changes TrueNAS does under the hood. So that makes it really easy. Consequently, if I change my storage pools, for example, and I don't want my apps to run on this anymore, say, for example, I get an NVMe drive that's even faster, I can go ahead and do my apps, and I can change my configuration. I can unset the pool and then choose the pool. So that's a possibility as well. So I wanted to tell you guys that in terms of guys that are wondering how to do apps management through multiple different types of pool storage, where you have fast pools and you have slower pools, that's the way it's done. Take your apps, make sure you choose the pool that's your fast pool, and then in my case, I point everything else at the big pool, just in case I have a ton of data. I do not recommend you keep your data sets on the same fast pool unless you have specific apps that need really, really, really fast data access, and that's not very common. In fact, there's only a few apps I can think of that are like that. I kind of like it on something more resilient like my big pool here. For me, that's just the way that I like to do it. Finishing up, there's a few more things that we're going to take a look at inside of our apps pool. In this configuration file, you'll see there's a few other things here, like choosing pool and unsetting the pool. Sometimes if you get stuck or apps don't want to pool, you could always unset and then choose your pool again. You have to choose a pool to have the app service running. You'll see here I have the big green check mark because I have my app service running and I have a pool selected. If you don't see the big green check mark, you probably need to choose a pool. Here we have the opportunity to manage container images. I don't use this a lot. I actually like the Portainer interface more. The reason for that is I can't tell what's in use and what's not. So there's 55 container images here. I'm not actually positive what's in use, and it's hard to tell here. Portainer will tell you, there'll be a little tag here. It says like unused in its own column. So I like Portainer for managing container images more. I think it's a little bit cleaner. Also, the Docker registry sign-in. Docker has made a change recently talking about how many pulls you can make in a day when you're not logged in. I think the limit is like 100. So if you're like rebuilding your pool, if you're launching all your containers for the first time, you might get this warning that TrueNAS pops up. This is something like, hey, like you're nearing your pull limit, or there's some limit that you're about to hit, or you're about to hit your quota. In the event that happens, you can always sign into a Docker registry. And like I said, I don't have a registry right here, but you can add it, and you can add your username and password here for Docker Hub. And the reason for that is the way that Docker changed their settings under the hood. It's made a lot of people upset. It has nothing to do with you guys or TrueNAS, so don't worry about complaining to them. It's not their fault. Docker does allow you to make a free account, a free username and password that'll let you get way more pulls than people who aren't signed in. So in the event that you're doing a lot of pulls and you come up against that barrier, just go ahead and Docker Hub and create a username and password and just put it in right here, and you'll be fine. Not a huge issue there, but it's kind of an annoying change. And the last thing in here, again, I told you guys, is settings. If you want, I have my test branch here. These are the branches. I don't recommend you actually have tests. These are the branches for the TrueNAS Community Apps Catalog. I have Stable, Enterprise, and Community. That's great. Don't mess with the address pools unless you know what you're doing. And again, down here, if you have a NVIDIA graphics card, you'll see the checkbox. You don't want to check that to make sure the NVIDIA toolkit is installed so that your apps can actually talk to your graphics card. So I'm going to save that like that. And that's pretty much everything for apps. So I hope you guys like this video. If you have any questions, please comment below. This is coming to the end of the TrueNAS Fundamentals series. So if you guys have other requests that you want to see within the series, or maybe some other kind of series like this, please let me know in the comments so we know where to go after this video in terms of teaching what we call evergreen content. Please like and subscribe to this channel, of course. If you have some really technical questions or want to have a much longer conversation, don't leave a comment. Just jump on our Discord server and talk to us there. And of course, if you want to say thank you to me personally, please buy me a coffee.